acid rain is rain, so that means it's taking place in the troposphere, the area of the atmosphere where weather happens. As a result, the impact of industries that are producing acid rain precursors like sulfur dioxide are regional rather than global. The pollutants are falling back down to the earth before they get mixed in with the general atmosphere and spread globally. So why are some regions of the earth, shown here in red, affected more than others? You can see that an at-risk area is Thailand and the Malay Peninsula down into Indonesia, and that Southeast China is an area with a current problem. And that's because of the sources of pollution, burning of fossil fuels through industry. So as China is becoming more developed, the predominant winds are blowing the acid rain over to our part of the world. So you can see a similar kind of pattern in Europe. Pollution in the UK, in Germany and Poland spreads across to Sweden and Finland. And it travels over the coniferous forests in Scandinavia. So other factors that affect the impact of acid rain are the geology and vegetation in an area. We'll go back to talking about those coniferous forests in a moment. So in some regions you have alkaline soils. This is an area showing limestone bedrock, and limestone calcium carbonate is going to mix with water to produce an alkaline pH. So that's going to have a minimal impact when acid rain falls because it's going to neutralize the acid. However, in other parts of the world, like in Scotland or again in Scandinavia, you have a granite bedrock, and these naturally produce acid soils. These parts of the world have plants that are adapted to slightly acidic soils, but they're not going to be able to counter the acidic rain. So when the acidic rain falls, those soils are going to become even more acidic than the plants are adapted to, and cause problems. Tropical soils also tend to be quite acidic because with the heavy rainfall, they leach out lots of ions of different metals that make the soil quite acidic. So again, that's why Thailand's an at-risk area, because we've got the acid rain blowing over us and also soil that is going to be susceptible. So with regards to the vegetation, conifers are actually more affected than deciduous trees. And that's because conifers have needles. So they're your pine trees, your cedars, and your spruces. And those pines tend to stay on the tree for about 7 years. But when they're affected by acid rain, the needles will only live for about 2 years. So that means that the tree is going to be very low on needles. It's going to have to produce a lot more, use more energy. And so quite often it will have a great loss of needles. And they can only survive with about a 30% loss. If they lose more than 40%, then the whole tree can die. Deciduous trees, on the other hand, they lose their leaves every winter, so they're kind of shedding the problem leaves that have accumulated the acid rain. So that's not to say that deciduous trees don't have a problem with acid rain, but they have less of a problem than the coniferous trees. So thinking more about the effects on living organisms, as I discussed, conifers are directly affected by acid precipitation, but they're also affected by changes in the soil nutrients. Acid rain actually adds nitrogen to the soil, and we know that nitrogen is a limiting factor for plant growth. So the acid rain actually acts as a fertilizer, and young trees will be able to grow very, very rapidly. But because they're not having to send out deep roots to find more nitrogen, that means they only grow shallow roots. And then that means further that when there's a storm, those trees easily fall over, and we get lots of deforestation happening because of this acid rain. The acid rain also changes the chemical composition of the soil. For example, calcium is washed away in acid rain, and so the tree is short of critical nutrients. And so although that won't kill the tree, it will weaken it and make it more susceptible to other diseases. So as you can see from this chart, now what this is showing is a range of pHs from 4, strongly acidic, up to strongly alkaline at about 10. And if we take nitrogen as an example, nitrogen is maximum in between this slightly acidic and slightly alkaline. Phosphorus is going to be maximum between very slightly alkaline and probably very slightly acid. Okay, so you can see that these different nutrients are going to be maximized at different pHs. Now, where the orange bars are drawn, that's actually the pH that's going to maximize soil nutrients down here. So we want our soil being ever so slightly acidic is actually very good for soil nutrients. But a little bit more than that, and we start to have problems with excesses of iron, manganese, and then not enough nutrients like calcium and phosphorus. Aluminium is an important metal for us to talk about. It actually behaves very similarly to the manganese and boron and copper and zinc in the soil. And aluminium has actually been implicated in Alzheimer's disease. Now, aluminium, when it's in high concentration in the soil, will actually get into the plants, and then we end up eating them, and that's going to affect the aluminium concentration in our body. There's actually been some recent research that has suggested that the bee die-offs are related to the bees taking in too much aluminium from the nectar in the flowers, and it's actually causing a form of dementia in bees. The effect on aquatic organisms will be quite obvious to you. So they're very sensitive to changes in the pH, and they might be directly killed or weakened. And of course, this has knock-on effects for the rest of the ecosystem in a river or lake system. So here you can see the sensitivities. The organisms are all doing fine at a pH of 6.5, but as we drop down in pH, they start to drop off. Clams and snails are not going to be around anymore when the pH is 5.5. Now remember, when we went to the outdoor classroom and we couldn't find any snails, and we weren't sure why and whether it had to do with the clearing of the rushes, it's possible that the disturbance of the mud slightly acidified the water and that this caused a die-off in the snails. Recently I've been over there and there are snails there now, and it would be very interesting to have a look at the pH both back in 2 years ago and now. Okay, and then you can see salamanders, they can tolerate slightly more drop in pH, but if we get down to 4.5 and 4, we're only going to have some species of frogs. So this is a direct effect of acid rain on organisms.